welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is one of three contenders for the Bone Throne.
Tim Longo.
Hop on that Bone Throne.
Yeah, maybe I didn't find that, or
did you not
know.
Find there was a book? I actually read the book on my so that we're talking about Baldur's Gate, and we'll get into that in about a moment. Yes, but so there was this book in it was in that town, not Baragast, I guess, and there was a bar on one side, and then there was Elven. Firebeard or whatever his name was, Firebeard Elvenhair, whatever that guy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He's like, oh, trade this book for this other book, and I went, and then he gave me a book in trade.
Yeah,
I guess
that's like a backstory,
right? And it's a whole backstory basically to the game, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. So it tells about how these three people split the throne of the overall very powerful god of death, original god of death. Anyway.
Yeah,
that was the Bone Throne. So
got it. Yeah, I opened the book up, saw how long it was, and closed the book. I know that's unlike me. In this
I read it dramatically on stream. So it was,
that's perfect. You do want to do that on stream. That makes more sense. I'm here rushing through to finish, and I'm like, okay, I'll read that later
today. You're like, oh no, I don't have enough time. Skip the books. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so we are. It is our first in a series about Baldur's Gate, the 1998 RPG. We've actually previously played Planescape Torment, which is made with the same engine, but we decided to look at this one partly because we're both playing D&D a lot lately in two different campaigns, each of us DMing one online in two different systems, and we thought, why not add a third system?
Yeah. What do we do?
Which we'll get to.
As soon as I started this, I'm like, what do we do? I don't know if this is a good idea, but I am enjoying it. I definitely am enjoying it. And I'm having like extreme flashbacks on some things, but in mostly good ways. But we're definitely glutton for punishment right now. When it comes to D&D. Yeah. So in 1998, which we did not plan, ironically, the previous game we just finished, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Came out just 4 weeks before this one. So, I guess to the day, right? It was the 23rd, and this was the 21st of December. So this was getting in right under the wire before toward the end of the year. So second game from BioWare, who had made Shattered Steel, which I remember being an early sort of Windows 95 game. I remember that being one of its claims to fame, that it was pretty, I don't know if it was the first, but it was definitely an early Windows 95 game. And I can remember
kind of a mech warrior kind of game.
Exactly. Yeah. And not something they really ever returned to, which is kind of strange too. It's an interesting place to start, considering where they've ended up as a studio, or where they spent 20 years as a studio. Their studio has changed quite a lot since they came under ownership of EA. Gosh, like a decade ago, more, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, something like that. It's been a good while.
It was
07, 08, something like that.
Yeah, 2007. Yep.
Yeah. So it's been a while. In any case, we talked a lot about 1998 games at the beginning of the last series, but a quick review. You want to go ahead and give me that rundown?
Yeah, same rundown. Half-Life, which we've played. Metal Gear Solid 1, which we've played. Grim Fandango came out this year. Resident Evil 2.
There's the Bone Wagon.
There's the Bone Wagon and the Bone Throne. Yeah, there's
That's
a Bone theme going on in this year. We've actually previously also talked about the fact that 98 was a landmark year in general, right? Because of so many influential games. So it is not, coincidence that we keep playing games from this year. StarCraft 1 came out this year, which we have not played. Unreal came out this year.
Good year to join the industry.
Yeah, and Brett Duville came out this year, and
I'm not sure that means what you think.
That's not what I meant to say. Let's see, and then there's one other. Thief.
No, Luke Duville came out this year.
Right. Was he born the year that you started? I forgot
Yes.
that. Okay.
Yes,
okay. And then Thief, the Dark Project, was the other one that we played from this year. So yeah, quite an interesting year for sure. And that's kind of the highlights. There's more stuff,
right.
But
yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple other games that you've mentioned that are like, yeah, I could see playing that. I mean, Grim Fandango's close to the top of my list of all time. So it would be one that I would consider at some point.
Worth. And as far as like, pseudo 3D adventure games, it's probably a good candidate. Yeah, for sure. And then one we haven't played that I didn't mention that we've talked about from time to time is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. The original also came out this year. So, no, that might have been nope, that's the Windows. I thought that was Saturn. Okay, yeah. So that's really the highlights, I'd say.
Yeah.
And
it looks
an epic like year. We'll be back at some point.
Yeah, almost certainly. Well, we could just do a bunch of games in a row. Let's just finish off 98.
Right.
Get it over with. Xenogears. I'm still pulling for Xenogears.
Turn the podcast into a linear sort of where we're just
starting in 98.
Time.
And then we'll do 99. Anyway, I'm sure there's some that we missed in that time as well because we were busy shipping games, but anyway, so it was the start of BioWare and this Infinity engine. We'll talk about the engine a little bit, but as I recall, 5 games made, as well as some expansions, because Baldur's Gate 2 had, I believe, an expansion. I can't remember if Baldur's Gate 1 did.
Tales from the Sword Coast, I think, was one.
Oh, right. Yes. And then Icewind Dale 1 and 2. And of course, Planescape Torment, which we've already mentioned as having played, which was so different, like we said, that it's almost a different sort of game. It being so dialogue heavy, so varied in its outcomes in some ways. Just in quest outcomes, really, which is a little bit different from the BioWare style and lent itself well to the setting, which we talked about a little bit last time. So.
Yeah, and I think the structure will end up being sort of quite a bit different too. Meaning, Planescape Torment was structurally almost like an adventure game, even though it was an RPG. You know what I mean? Like there was very story beats that were happening in a certain order, and you could definitely explore the zones and areas that you were in at the time. But it wasn't like Baldur's Gate, as we'll talk about. If you want it to be and let it be, there's a lot of zones to go to, and you can kind of go to them in various times, kind of up to you. So it feels more like traditional D&D, kind of roaming the land, if you, that's if you kind of want to do everything. And so that structurally, I would say they're, not to say that Baldur's Gate's open world, but it's like closer to that side of RPGing than I think Planescape is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is representing a different, as you mentioned last time when we sort of previewed the series, it is about the most D&D setting in that it's set in Faerun, the Forgotten Realms setting or world, the world of Toril, I believe is the is the world. And that is sort of a place with a lot of intrigue and politics. I remember getting the box set when it came out and just how much I didn't have anybody to play it with at the time. I was in grad school, I think, and we weren't really playing a lot of D&D, but it was definitely, I was so into it, and how many characters there were and how rich everything seemed to be, although it mostly settled around, the bulk of sort of the original sets was sort of the Sword Coast where Baldur's Gate is set, and then down into sort of I guess it's called the Dales or something like that. Not Icewind Dale, which is north, but sort of south from there. There's sort of like the medieval Europe section of the world that is really the focus of the setting, at least in its initial supplements. And they talked about all the other places, but they were sort of more, and these things are over there. So that they could expand it further in the future.
Yeah. And this game, I I don't remember sort of what they've talked about when it comes to the motivation for setting it here, versus say, Icewind Dale being kind of heavily influenced by the books. There was not really, before this came out, there was not really like a Sword Coast books that would have influenced. So they basically, maybe they worked with, Wizards of the Coast, or I guess, would that be Wizards at the time, or was that?
It was still Wizard. Ooh,
was it still
no, it was changing at this time. In fact, I believe it was sold to Wizards between when this game was signed and when it came out. Yeah, I believe it was TSR until 97. And then Wizards of the Coast bought it in 97. That was a huge deal.
Yeah.
Enormous.
You're right. Course, I think, and I remember that being sort of a big big part of the talking points for this, and kind of not talking points, but like the PR around it was that transition. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, it's fine. I mean, I think we had talked briefly last time about how they had expanded the franchise in so many odd directions, including Planescape Torment, or Planescape, I guess was the setting, and Spelljammer and these other things, right? It was just kind of all over the place and very scattershot, and not, it didn't feel like there was a coherent strategy around revitalizing Dungeons and Dragons, and I think that made them sort of ripe for takeover.
Yeah,
and were purchased by Wizards, which was flush with Magic the Gathering cash. So it's just kind of an interesting time for all of this.
Yeah, but then also, like, didn't Hasbro buy Wizards?
A little bit
was that later?
Okay. Yeah, definitely later. Because I remember all the stuff coming out around Wizards. Let's just say culture. And all of that, which would have happened, that probably happened more like 92, 93. I don't remember exactly. I'm actually
right.
looking.
Yeah.
That's my recollection, is that it was purchased. Oh no, it was purchased in 99. So actually not that long after that. Parent was, okay. That's more recent than I remember.
So they happened not too far apart then.
Yeah, not too far apart. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't have a final date right in front of me. I'm trying to see it. Oh, September 99. Yeah. So, interesting. Although they had been trying to buy them for 5 years, so they finally bought them. Anyway, that's getting a little bit further afield, but that is some of the prehistory.
And I think the other thing to mention, of course, about BioWare's origins is really the two doctors, as they've come to be called, both literally medical doctors, Ray Musica, you think?
Yep, I believe so, yeah.
Greg Zeshchuk. Yep. Yes, I've never known how to pronounce their names.
And in fact, they were founded as a medical software company.
Yes, right. They were doing
BioWare.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Shattered Steel does not refer to a dropped piece of medical equipment or something like that.
A scalpel, a shattered scalpel.
Scalpel. That's what I was looking for. Not come up with the word. So they decided to pivot because they were more interested in video games. It was something they had kind of had a sideline, and they were with the company for a long time. So
well into EA, and they bootstrapped themselves. And then, because of their interesting origin, I think kind of became a little bit infamous. And then once Baldur's Gate, this game came out, it really put them on the map and charted a course for them. And as Brett said, like, they stopped kind of focusing so much on the action games, and their bread and butter ended up really becoming RPGs of different flavors. And obviously everyone knows, in the future, once EA happened or whatever, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, they started their own IPs. Baldur's Gate was I think the fork in the road for them. And I think that the doctors kind of became, they were well respected and are well respected, and they did leave the industry essentially. But they seem to have a vision for what they wanted to do with the company, and push that forward even after EA acquired them. So unfortunately, EA doesn't have a great track record in sort of fostering companies like that once they've been purchased. I think that they're still finding their feet lately, but overall, their legacy is quite impressive. And Baldur's Gate is going to, I think, easily become a bit of a formula for these kinds of RPGs, not just for BioWare, but I think for other studios. And so it's going to be interesting to talk about this game and play the game because of that. And in fact, obviously, like we talked about, Planescape is definitely not the same game, but definitely there are influences there for all of the Infinity Engine games and even others. So yeah, pretty big. And the kind of around the same time, which another game we played, which was it 96 was Diablo, I think.
That sounds right. Yes. Yeah.
Those are, that was another flavor of action RPG, as we've talked about with that series. Go back and listen if you so choose. But there became sort of like these two main flavors that really, there was the BioWare model and the Blizzard model when it comes to these sorts of games. And then you could we've played Fallout as well, kind of hitting the turn-based side of things, because Black Isle that made the Icewind Dale series also made, Fallout 2 and was sort of the similar teams that kind of made Fallout 1. So, there's still, those folks are still down there, as we've talked about many times, doing the same stuff at Obsidian and in Exile and those sorts of studios. So yeah, Baldur's Gate, definitely a big one.
Yeah, one of the things you sort of alluded to there is Diablo, and the sort of difference here is, first of all, it is a sort of slower, more methodical paced game, even in the combat. It doesn't have, it has the immediacy of I click on a thing and I go up and whack it with a sword or whatever. That still can happen, but it does a couple of things. One, it introduces new combat mechanics with a sort of pause anytime and change orders, which is interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into that. The other thing is that whereas Diablo is very it's not so much that it's tiled, but it's sort of composited from pre-built pieces. This is all uniquely handcrafted and recognizable from the setting, if you know the setting. So if you had seen a map of Candlekeep, you're seeing a map of Candlekeep, or something very similar to it. You may not go into every room or whatever, but it's recognizable. And it's at the time, I guess it would have been 1024 768 pixel perfect backgrounds. So you're zoomed in, or you can zoom in at least to be sort of that level of resolution, and they're pretty stunning. They're still hold up pretty well, actually. It's one thing that 2D games do well is they translate well to the future, and not all 3D games do. So 2D tends to have longer legs. Once you get past a certain level of resolution, they tend to hold up pretty well, and I think this one does. I think the sprites may be a little less so because they are maybe a little cartoony, and because they have to be animated, they have to face all these different directions and all that stuff. They are maybe a little less hold up a little less well because they probably have limited color set. Hello, dog.
Sorry.
That's all right. And so they I don't think quite work as well. They don't feel fully situated in the world to me, looking at them. But I understand how that happens, right? You're limited probably to a palette of some kind at the time, for sure, and for performance reasons, because you've got to get all this stuff constantly on the screen, and at the time that was all software. So and
I think I think the which we talked a little bit about with Diablo, but the sort of generation of the artwork, with essentially CG rendered backgrounds that are, composited down to 2D, like you're talking about, adds, I think, that fidelity that still holds up. I think Candlekeep is a good example because you kind of, once you reveal it via the Fog of War, you kind of reveal this great big, structure in the middle, and that was kind of one of the grand aspects, I think, of this game as an RPG versus, say, Diablo. Diablo is definitely more dungeon crawly, especially the first one, right? Because you only really have the dungeons, and other than the topside stuff in the town. And so this definitely feels like, even just in the first chapter that, prologue and chapter that we played, it feels like you're really like traveling right across the land, and you get to a certain zone, and like Brett said, it's handcrafted, and you're you feel like you're, crawling through the forest and trying to find, whatever it may be you're looking for. And Diablo is much more twitchy, and I don't know, is deterministic. That's probably not the right word that I'm looking for, because this one is rules based, right? So your little character is going to run up and hit, try hitting the thing, but it's still running the numbers behind the scenes because it's using the D&D rules. And so there's going to be critical misses. There's going to be,
right.
whiffs, and then occasionally you'll hit, but that's like dice are being rolled behind the scenes, and versus exactly. Diablo is like you're clicking your button furiously and like hitting a thing, and
right,
and there's no rules behind it. You're just hitting or not.
There are rules. They're a little simpler, and they're more based just on the weapon you have and what level you are. And here it's the full. I mean, it's very similar, I would say, right? I mean, I think you can whiff creatures, can't you, in Diablo when you start out? I think you're sometimes missing.
Maybe
I feel like
maybe.
You hear the swipe
the
perception.
The perception is not the same. Yeah,
right. No, it's definitely not the same. This is like I said before, it is more methodical and slower paced, just because of how turn-based combat works generally. And this transition is a pretty good one to make it sort of feel real time, even though everybody is still taking a turn. It's sort of what you imagine when we talked with David Brevik, yeah, he said, well, basically we had everything be floating point number of the time and all that stuff rather than turns. And here it sort of feels that way. Not that everything takes different amounts of time, but that things are kind of happening in an order that was determined by initiative. One thing I will say about this, and we've kind of been joking about playing multiple versions of D&D, I don't really feel that D&D most of the time in a sense of having to know what the rules actually are. Like, I don't have to know about initiative. It happens. Like, I know it's good to have a better one, but I don't really need to know more than that. And I don't know. It's not obvious to me who had the best initiative, when combat starts. I don't need to know. I probably could pay attention and figure out and make better planning, but it's not really balanced towards very careful, methodical, tactical planning in that way most of the time. I think that may be less true as the game goes on, compared to something like Temple of Elemental Evil later, where it was very clear to me, even though it had a similar sort of pause and go, it was also very clear, like, oh no, this character didn't get initiative. I'm going to get roasted, by some mage or something because they got a high initiative, and I might as well just reload before a combat because it was a tough game.
I didn't realize. So Temple of Elemental Evil was not turn-based then, not strict turn-based. I didn't remember that. I had in my head at least that it was turn-based, like a Larian Studios game or something. But but I don't remember exactly.
I remember it being similar to this in that it was turn-based. Oh, maybe it was explicitly turn-based. No, I think it was, actually, now that you say that. I feel like you can pause at any time and spend time thinking. So maybe there was a hybrid. Maybe there's a hybrid where if you pause if you didn't issue orders fast enough, the AI would take over or something like that and just do something. I don't remember what it was because it's been at least 10 years since I played that game. I don't really remember. I do remember really carefully stepping through each phase of combats near the end, and it being very, very laborious, really, to get through, and like, oh, I missed, I know I'm gonna die, so I might as well just reload to this other point, like saving at different points.
Uber save scumming,
very save scummy at the end of that game.
Yeah, I didn't finish that one, but yeah, I definitely want to reinforce what you're saying, that I think something that can't be understated enough about this game, that people who maybe were not even alive when this game came out or what have you, is that this was a big deal, the way that they implemented combat in this game. Obviously, Diablo may have had some impact on that. Who knows? But the concept of turning Dungeons and Dragons, into a more real time with pause kind of game is a big deal, and it I think it heavily influenced CRPGs, at least Western CRPGs, moving forward. Because there was this sort of like permission, if you will, because we've talked about Fallout, we've played Fallout, and that was like very strict turn-based kind of combat, at least, and this was a hybrid. I remember when it came out and sort of like thinking like, wait, there was always, we were just debating like, how is it turn late? Like, how do you describe it to people, And then another thought I had when we started playing is, I'm wondering, I have any information on this, and I couldn't find any like articles where they talked about it, but they probably must have done a GDC postmortem on this game already. But I feel like the pause feature must have almost even been like a debug feature that they just kept in, you know what I mean? Or something, or made into a feature, because it feels like something you'd want while you were making the game. But anyway.
Yeah, or there was, I could also see it kind of going the other way, where they sort of would just let the turns run, because there were AI, right, obviously running, and maybe they just the player would have to issue his commands if you turned on the or something like that. So just the main PC, right, the character, the character who's not allowed to die, basically. Like if you were only issuing commands for him, even though you could do all the other ones, I can imagine them getting to it that way as well, where it's like, oh, this is weird. We only stopped to issue commands for this one character. What if we never stopped? You could sort of see the experiments coming at it from a number of different ways, right?
Kind of like Diablo did, right? I mean, that's what Dave said, right? They were turn-based originally, right? Wasn't that?
Turn-based with that weird floating point times for turns. Right. If you were swinging something heavier, it would take longer type. Your turn would take longer, but they were still turns. It was just,
it's a fascinating. And I actually forgot to ask this, and we can talk about it. Well, we will talk about it more as we go through the series. But are you using AI, like party AI? Do you have that turned on, or do you have it turned off usually?
I have it turned on. Most of the. I have it turned on, but I almost every combat go and specifically issue orders anyway. Yeah. It's more just there in case I get jumped or whatever, and I don't have time to respond, and I'm happy to react to let the whoever goes first go and be like, yeah, that was fine, go ahead, just to not bog things down too much. But I do have it on, and there are actually settings where you can go in and make different characters have different approaches as well. If you look at their character records, you can customize. They have
script or what have you.
Right, they have scripts, but they're sort of individual. They're you can look at the names of the script files, and it's like the character's name is right there in the middle of it somewhere, which is also kind of funny. Like offensive, so and so, offensive Minsk dot whatever dot script, which is kind of funny to see. But,
do you have Minsk?
No, not yet.
Okay,
that was just a name that I
remember. Pretty iconic. Yeah,
pretty memorable. He did show up in the tutorial, I believe.
Yeah. Like the best of were in that tutorial, which I did play that as well. So
I think the tutorial was an addition as well. I don't remember if there was the tutorial was in the original game.
Oh, that's a good point. That's it may not have been. I don't remember either. But
I have the original discs, so I need to look and see if it was in there. I just don't remember. I probably have the manual still, so I can look and just page through that ridiculous book. But I thought the tutorial did a fairly good job of sort of introducing you to the concepts, but also there's so much you don't have to worry about really all that much. Thaco in particular is the one that is just, I just don't even think about it. Like there was one thing I was like, boy, I remember that being really weird. I don't know whose idea it was to make one of the numbers be better if it goes up and the other number to be better if it goes down, and you have to, do math compared to like what your base. So Thaco means to hit armor class 0, and you had that number, so say 17 would hit an armor class 0. Now -1 was a better armor class than 0, which would mean you'd need an 18 to hit it. You'd need one better roll versus the one better AC from your 17 baseline number, which is just a really weird. That was probably the one thing that is like, wow, why didn't they think of this before now when it came in 3rd edition? Change. That was because it's just the number. It's just which direction does the number line go? It's not really anyway. So it's
there's some
obvious change. But
was Thaco? It was created for 2nd edition, or was it
no,
a legacy?
That's original. That's legacy.
That's right.
First edition. So there's probably something where that came from tabletop miniatures or something like that, which is
that's what I was going to say. It's kind of as old.
I have no idea, because I've never really played any tabletop war games or something like that from the 60s, 70s, 50s, etc. But those were very table driven, and I can sort of see it coming out of that because it feels like that. It feels like, oh, well, if your this is this number, then it maps in this way to the table. In fact,
and there's a table. I'm looking at the table right now, and I actually forgot about the table. Yeah, and I was like, oh, no, the table, and it's like roll, 1 to 2 on a D20, and this, and then this, and in your armor.
It was there was a lot of that at the time in 1st and 2nd edition of supplements, which had lots and lots of details. Like, okay, if you roll this, then look at this table in this book to get a really gruesome description of what you do to the other guy's arm, sort of things. I mean, it was the sort of system that went very, very deep if you wanted to go crazy with the dice and the numbers, which some people did because of its history.
Right. It was the numbers, right, side of things. So I'm just a quick cursory look, and apparently the original D&D rulebook Men and Magic in 1974 had a chart that was similar to Thaco. So it might have been, that's sort of part of the legacy, that there was kind of, you had to look at this thing to decipher what the role was going to do. But yeah, what an interesting deep hole to go down.
Yep.
Boy. Yeah. But I think you're right. I think going into this, I was a little nervous about, the number crunchiness of 2nd edition, and kind of like, because I feel like I've moved on with my life. I didn't want to go backwards, but for the most part, you can kind of engage with what you want to about it, but you don't have to really like nitpick. It seems like, at least on you may have to, like, if were to play on higher difficulty, because there's like 2 or 3 higher difficulty than normal.
Yes.
I'm just playing on normal.
I played it on a higher difficulty when I originally played this game because
you did.
What I always did. That's what I always did. I always played on at least hard. Come on, are you even playing if you're not playing on hard? I was so young then.
Yeah. But so there's not really a need. There's more slop and normal, because I think it's normal is 25% less damage from enemies or something. So
something like that. Yeah. I think hard is like, this is the actual rule set, and then there's one that's and here the enemies get a bonus or something like that. So to make it even, I don't know why you would do that to yourself, but. I guess. I mean, if you're really into the tactical challenge puzzle of it and trying to get the most out of the system, I just feel like you'd be reloading all the time. I remember I tried that though with the Icewind Dale. Remember they had a Heart of Winter mode, which was the hardcore, really difficult, maybe permadeath. I don't remember if it was permadeath.
I think it was it was riffing off of the Diablo, right? Hardcore mode.
Yeah.
And I mean, the funny thing is I definitely rushed a little bit through chapter 1, which meant I think I was underleveled for a couple spots. So that was probably why, but I had some rough fights that I was doing a lot of reloading on just in chapter 1. So on normal. So, we definitely, as we go, I think we'll need.
That's a statistical problem with the D&D model. I was actually talking about this with a friend today, with Jean, who plays D&D with us. on our tabletop game, and it's not a great model in a lot of ways, right? Because you're rolling this one die, right? Yeah. And it's equal distribution, 1 to 20, right? And you actually need a pretty high number, but it's just like, I don't know, 4 of the numbers are going to be that, instead of like, so in contrast with like GURPS, or I think Shadowrun was this way, but other systems which had like, invest this many D6s in this skill and then get so many successes type sorts of thing, which are just gentler, statistically speaking. They're just a little easier, and they're easier to balance, to say, or to make easier to say, well, you could have a skill which lets you re-roll some ones or something like that. So you have like this, just the statistics of a single die covering so much just is a weird choice. Like, it's a historical choice, and then they kind of leaned into it for third, and they've stuck with it, forever. But it is just, I sort of get it also, because, you wouldn't want to have a million dice necessarily. Because, as you got higher level, I can just imagine, I mean, you cast a high enough level fireball, you're already borrowing dice from everybody at the table or whatever. And if you had to do that with every combat, it would slow the game down. It's kind of nice to roll a number and see a number and be done, and add whatever bonuses. So I get it from a practical standpoint, but from a statistical standpoint, it's kind of bad.
Yeah. So. The swings are heavy, as far as like what direction things can go, as we both seen in our games, and have had happen to both of our players from each other's perspective.
Well, that's why there are different Band-Aids. Like, I have hero points, and has inspiration and advantage. And like that. So there have been ways that they address this to basically make it a little gentler, or make it, or reward play, which is another good thing to do. I encourage all of that in the systems, and I think the system has evolved pretty well, actually, considering it's that sort of fundamental limitation. But especially with a computer game, you sort of like, why are you adhering to this? Like, is a weird thing, and it's well, because the license will sell copies.
I think that's going to come up a lot, right, while we're playing this, because it is so much trying to simulate that, and there's times when I think it's going to really be frustrating. But yeah, I mean, I think advantage and disadvantage is a good innovation in that regard. But I agree with you; it's still ultimately a Band-Aid, but though very clever Band-Aid, and simple Band-Aid. But to your point, the two systems that which we've ironically not long ago played one of them for the podcast. The two systems that I've always appreciated from that statistical side, which, you're doing the math more than I am, so I wouldn't kind of understand the nuance of this, but, the World of Darkness system, which is just all D10s, and you're just rolling the number of D10s that you have for that particular skill. Like, each pip you have is a D10, right? So you're just rolling those. And then the other one that I love is Cthulhu, which is all D6s. Right. And you're just rolling, and the only dice they use are D6s, and same, so how many do you need to roll? So it is a lot of dice, but it's simpler in a different way. And I had never thought about it that way, but to your point, it's more forgiving. So I do like those systems. I haven't played GURPS though. I don't think I've ever played GURPS. So
I only played it once or twice in college, and Shadowrun too, at the time, whatever it was, 2020, Shadowrun 20. It was Cyberpunk 2020. So Shadowrun, whatever, second edition Shadowrun, I think, is what I had back then, and played once or twice. So, and I'm just kind of recollecting that, but it is just a weird thing, and it does mean, first and second edition were notoriously lethal versions of the game, and in fact, I think that was some of the appeal, was that it was appealing to a hardcore.
The Dark Souls of its time.
Yeah, to some degree, maybe. Like, I'm just thinking back to some of the modules, the classic modules from the time, and like how difficult they were, but also how lock and key, and the expectation was as that your players knew everything about the system when they came to the table, and they were playing the strategic game, not the role-playing game. And I think The second edition was when that started to change, and then third edition really leaned into it and said, no, this is really a storytelling game more so than it is.
Yeah.
There is tactics, and strategy, but not. But before that, I mean, you think about something. Well, any of them, like White Plume Mountain or Tomb of Horrors, but even some of the very earliest, like low level dungeons, it's combat. You have to know that tactics. Yeah, there's combat, and like you have to know that this monster is not resistant to vinegar or something. So you pour vinegar in to solve the puzzle, so you don't even have to fight the monster, right? And the players just have to know that, and not just figure it out from the environment. So it was a different time.
Well, and fifth edition, right? I mean, even more than third and fourth is the weird one that's hard to even talk about. But with fifth, it's even sort of marketed as a storytelling engine, more than anything.
Well, and they're building it into character creation. Before that, there was, if you want to think of a backstory for your character, it's up to you. Now it's part of character creation to have some sort of motivation or goal and some sort of flaw and some sort of character backstory that you roll tables to determine how it impacts your character if you want to, or you pick one if you want to, I guess. Who cares? It's your game, have fun. But and that's different, and new. And it's funny because it makes it a lot easier to build off of that. It's funny, playing in a 5th edition campaign and being like, oh yeah, my character has all this stuff, and then having players in my own campaign where some players have that stuff, but not all of them. So and there's times when I'm like, oh, it'd be nice to be able to tie this into somebody's backstory, but I don't have a backstory for, I only have for 2 characters, right? So I don't,
Yeah.
And it's sort of building up. So I'm starting from nothing and sort of building up entirely from the campaign, which is also fine, but it's just different. But the reason why I wanted to talk about that is because it ties into sort of the BioWare house style, which is to make all the dialogue and quests and the different sort of responses it takes it in more of a storytelling direction here. Yeah. Which I think is one of the big things that we think of when we think of BioWare games is companions and companion quest lines, which are not purely here. They sort of are. But definitely dialogue choices where there's a good and evil, and maybe a neutral thing. And I'm curious to know what you make of that so far.
Well, I mean, I guess to be honest, I had forgotten how much they were doing it in the first game, because it definitely was a huge deal for, focus for their later games, especially like KOTOR and Mass Effect and Dragon Age. But the underpinnings of it is in this game, and the repercussions of your choices are maybe not as clear as it does become later for like a Mass Effect when it comes to Paragon or Renegade, but decisions. But here, you can be a jerk or you can be nice, and they're trying to, which again, looking at the sort of ahead of time, I looked at the full list of Dungeons and Dragons computer games leading up to this. And, from vague memory, I didn't play every single one, but from vague memory, none of them really attempted to simulate the role-playing side of the game in any real way. Branching, optional content. There was very little of that often. And
the only thing you would really call optional would be secrets.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff that was, exactly. Secret's a better way to put it. But here it's like, there's whole zones you could probably ignore, right? You could say the wrong thing to somebody and cut off, which had happened to me at least once, maybe twice, cuts off a quest entirely because of the way that you interacted. And so that was, I'm enjoying it now in its lighter sense because they go way heavier with it later. But it also became, they're starting to merge some genres there, right? There's sort of like some text adventure stuff in there, some adventure game, traditional, graphic adventure game stuff in there. They're trying to get some of the pen and paper in there and then doing it in this fairly, like for its time, very polished way. And then the writing's quite good too for its time, and writing also became something that BioWare was known for. And so, yes, it's very fantasy. It's very very stereotypical Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff. But when you said Minx, we both knew who that is, and they're memorable characters. And then this is also the beginning of the concept of those companion characters that, when you get to, the Mass Effect games, becomes a cornerstone of their marketing, those loyalty quests, it's like, that's a big thing that you want to do because you love the characters. And it's all in here. So I guess I had just forgotten how early it really started, and they kind of had not necessarily a full formula intact in the very beginning, but they definitely had pillars that they were going to return to and just kind of keep refining. And then, we won't talk about it for this series, but you get to like even Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, and they just keep doubling down. They just keep getting more elaborate and all this stuff, and a lot of like the worlds become more complicated, and there's a lot more side quests, and it just feels, like I'm being dramatic, but at the time, having not having a lot of D&D time to play tabletop, this was definitely scratching that itch for me as a gamer of like, I'm just going to sit down and play the simulated Dungeons and Dragons that because I wish I could go play tabletop because I just didn't have the time or the people or whatever. But this was enough, right? This was feeling like the spirit of that enough because of this dialogue system and the richness of everything going on.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I mean, it does feel like a step forward in the role playing direction, for sure. I mean, I feel that a lot. Having dialogue choices is really nice. I mean, you always run into the problem of, oh, that's not what I meant. Although in this case, they do provide all the text, so there have been experiments, right? Where
yeah.
And I think this is why they label things Paragon or Renegade, right? In something like Mass Effect, because they won't tell you everything she's about to say. I played Femship, of course, the canonical ship.
I've actually heard some complaints about this with Cyberpunk today, as of today, because their CD Projekt Red is actually one of their pillars is to be more gray about things in the decision making on purpose. So they actually lean into the other side of it. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about this before as well in connection with RPGs. I like that it's not great for streaming necessarily because there's a lot of text, but I do remember, especially at the time, loving that there was so much text and reading through like the adventure games. You mentioned this sort of adventure game sort of hybridization, like the adventure games from LucasArts, right? Of being able to read. Of course, in those cases, depending on the game, they might not tell you everything it was going to say, or you wouldn't know what the response was going to be, which of course is true here as well. But I love being able to look and say, okay, which of these is closest to what I want to do here, and not even necessarily thinking about it mechanically, or it's up to you if you want to play it in character. There is, as far as I can tell, no penalty for not sort of staying in your character alignment. But there are penalties or problems if characters don't mesh in your party, so that's a separate issue entirely. So that may come up in the future. It has not yet, but I did really love that. I loved it being written. It can be goofy. Some of the writing is, it's not consistent necessarily, but it's pretty consistent. So it's pretty good. Some of the names are pretty goofy, but yeah.
Well, and I think again, coming from looking again at that list of D&D video games, and you kind of see you kind of chart the course for where you are once you get to Baldur's Gate, and the leap is quite big, going from there to here. And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely not perfect, but I think still the uptick in quality was quite, because again, it mentions in sort of the BioWare history, they, acquired the rights to do the game directly. The predecessor was strategic simulation. So SSI was literally the group that was doing it right before they got
right.
You know, so like the lineage is right directly there, and so you see this pretty big shift of mentality. And
perspective, right? I mean, because SSI games, except for the combat, the tactical combat, in the original Gold Box games, I know Eye of the Beholder is different, but the original games were top down for the combat, but first person for everything else. And this is not that. This is always isometric, 3D as well, to really sell those visuals, I think, in particular. And just, it's also simpler. It's kind of strange that, well, I get why it wasn't done that way before, but it is kind of strange to think that in some ways it feels like a step back. I think probably for some players who are like, oh, I like the first person, you know, being in the eyes of the party. But I don't think it really supported that fully in a way that, I mean, if I were to play something first person today, I would have much better. I would have expectations that it would be much better from that standpoint, even though the tactical stuff might be a little harder to read. So,
right. Well, and this feels like a really elaborate, you know, tabletop, right? Like with miniatures or something, right? You know, there's kind of that. That's at least how I always translated it, and
absolutely.
Why I liked it for that regard. You know, in that regard. Yeah. So, do you want to talk about the parties that or how do we want to talk about any of the? There's not so much that happens, but
we can talk briefly. Sort of just the setup is you're clearly some kind of chosen one. You were adopted, you know, by this scholar in Candlekeep and kept there. Candlekeep is weird. Just a side note. I've lived there my whole life. I left with my dad. He gets killed, and I come back. I literally went straight back there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sorry, can't come in."
Yeah.
Wait a minute, what? I've lived here my whole life. I'm sorry. Can't come in. No DACA for you.
Yeah.
So
Candlekeep is it's a cult. I don't know what it is. Yeah,
it's weird. And I was actually curious. I was thinking about taking that book we got in Baragost and going back and seeing if they'd let me in with that book. But I haven't done that yet.
Interesting.
I was just curious, you know.
Yeah.
I did some stuff that I was curious about, like, oh, let me walk and see how far you can walk around Candlekeep, and you can go almost all the way around the outside of the walls. You know, once I was there. Anyway, so you go off. He's murdered by somebody in some very scary looking armor. And then you wake. I don't know why. I didn't fully follow why you're not killed with him. Maybe where there was an explosion, you get thrown free or something like that.
You run. He literally says run, and while he holds him off, and then you kind of like, it's implied that you leave the screen and hide or something, and then
and then your friend Imoen shows up, who has also now decided she's going to leave and join you if you want. I guess you can turn her down. There was
another classic character for me.
Yeah.
I just remember her so vividly. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Her portrait and her character. I should ask, and we should probably disclose now, character name and class.
Oh yeah, I'm Frosty, the dwarven cleric.
Oh, nice. I am Sammy Phantasmi, the halfling rogue.
Nice. You know, and then I should have figured. Yeah, and you know, there's a little bit of shared history with Frosty and this character, right? With some of my backstory with that character, with Frosty. So I thought that was interesting. But as far as being, you know, adopted and stuff, so
right, sure, yeah. So you, and then it's basically like he was taking you to meet some friends at an inn. And there's a letter. Actually, I guess there's a letter on his person. I think he might even tell you, like, oh, we're going to go meet these people. If something should happen, go to see these people. So there's a lot of different ways that's reinforced. Who are these two people called Khalid and Jahira, who are at the Friendly Arms Inn. Along the way, you run into two other characters, Mondragon and Xar, Xzar. Who are possible party members.
Zar,
and Zar, I guess. I wasn't really sure how to pronounce that one. Zeshuk and Musica is easier for me. That should have been the names of those characters. So they are like a fighter and a Actually, one's a fighter thief and the other's a necromancer. And then Khaled and Jaheira are a fighter and a fighter druid. A lot of multi-classing so far in the game.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that was wasn't that a big deal for second edition? Like that I feel like that was sort of one of their things, but maybe I'm wrong.
It was weird. Yeah, I think they had changed what the rules were, because before that there was multi-classing, but there are also characters with 2 classes, which was different in first edition. I didn't want to go into that.
Yeah, no, we shouldn't
off
fall
air.
Down that hole.
It was. I remember it being a whole thing though. But yeah. So I mean, it was basically to make yourself more of a jack of all trades, which to me suggests that there's maybe a problem with the system at that point. It's like, if this is what you're trying to make people do.
No, totally. Yeah, no, I think
that's why they changed away in third edition to make that all
right.
Like, you can spend points, and some things will spend more points, if you want to do them, but you can still do them,
That's why I think it was a selling point for second edition, because they were trying to solve a problem.
Yeah, trying to evolve. Yeah. Trying to solve it. Yeah. And then and that's
you get you.
I think that's all. Those are all the options I found so far for party members, and there's just lots of little quests along the way. So I don't want to necessarily belabor those, but there are lots of little side quests. Sort of go here, kill the spiders in my house, and get my husband's boots or whatever, and that sort of thing. That you can sort of run back and forth doing. Kill this ogre who stole my belt and return it to me.
A lot of fetch questing, and a lot of just basic, there's something with iron situation that seems to be part of chapter 2. And which I have vague memory of. So you're saying, from a companion party member perspective, those are the only ones that you have so far, or what?
Well, so I recruited both Mondragon and Imoen. I recruited, and then
Imoen
and Czar, the necromancer, and then I also, of course, added Khaled and Jaheira.
Got it. Okay, interesting.
So, was there somebody else you added?
Yeah, so I actually have 3 others. Because I did get the thief and the necromancer, but then left them in the Friendly Arms Inn when I kicked them out, when I realized, because Frosty's lawful good, so he's like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, yeah, this, even if it doesn't have an impact on the game, I'm going to role play that it will. So I kicked him out. And so I kind of ventured south. When
they died, I just let them die.
Right. You said something about that. I figured that was who it was. So you're like, well, I'm going to take you into battle and then let you be a meat shield, and then not resurrect you. So, I mean, they had it coming. They didn't seem like nice fellows. So I left them. So then down in Bergerost.
Oh, there is one other character I got. I just remembered the wild mage. Nira.
She's awesome. Nira. Yeah. So Nira, I have Nira. Is it Neela or Nira?
It's Nira.
Nira. Yeah.
I think Neelix from Deep Space Nine.
Right. So I have her, and then I have Garrick the Bard, who is also in Bergerost. Who is? Did you find the whole thing with
I found Garrick and
Silky?
Yeah, she totally already killed me. So with her, she had a lightning bolt, I think.
Yeah. I did reload and take her out, but then if you take her out, Garrick kind of becomes available.
I see,
and he's a bard.
I didn't try to get him. I figured there was probably something there, but after she killed me, I went and did some other stuff, and then I was like, oh, I better wrap this up. I've got the game tonight, so I gotta, and I was like, I should push on to Neshkel, and I'll come back and do this.
Right. Yeah. Well, so it's available. You can do it anytime. Yep. And then the last one that I brought in and then kicked out because he was also evil there's a dwarven fighter in Bergerost who actually has a quest about, I think, his son, maybe. And he's his name starts with a G, like not a Gwaine or Gadain or something like that. And I had him for a little while because he was a fighter. And then when I realized I think he's neutral evil maybe. And so I kicked him out. So now I have my last couple are Garrick and Nira. So that fills out my party currently. So yeah, I'm actually feeling pretty good about the group. The one thing that I'm bummed about that I forgot, and maybe you can confirm, they don't auto level. They don't equalize the levels when you add them to your party, or they don't do it very well because, when I brought Nira in, like she started from 0, like she didn't have any. So I had to so they're going to be out of whack level wise. I'm just kind of,
right.
Depending on when you bring them in.
So the way the math works out, though, I think, I don't know if this was true in 2nd edition. I can't remember. The way it works in 3rd edition, and I don't know if this was new. I know there were some things that were different about it. Maybe.
Oh, there's a multiplier if you're lower level.
Well, no, there's a table, and it's so the way it works in 3rd is you add up the experience points for each character based on their level. You look in this table and you add up all the things and then divide by the number of members in the party. So if a party is 4 5th level characters and 1 1st level character, then you're going to divide by 5. The 4 5th level characters will get a lot less XP than the 1st level character, because they'll be looking at, if I defeated this alone, I'd get this much to myself, and then I get 1/5 of that. So I don't remember if that's true in 2nd edition.
That makes sense then. Maybe I just need to give it time.
Yeah. People catch up pretty quickly on the basis of that. They just have to stay out of the way long enough. So,
Shinira has like 4 hit points, right? So it's
exactly.
Right.
Well, that's what happened with poor Xar there, or Czar, or whatever his name is that he charged in because his AI was, if I don't have any spells, then go up and hit with my staff. And I was like, well, that was dumb. Why would you do that?
There is a setting, actually.
There are settings to have them guard or whatever, or not do those things. But
in the gameplay settings, you can say, like, when they run out of ammo, that they won't rush in.
Right.
I noticed. So, but I
don't love that. I'd like to be able to pause and make those decisions and like be paying attention to those things, to notice. That makes me feel more involved in the combat. So I try not to do that. And I didn't note, I had forgotten that. I mean, he died maybe in the 2nd combat after I got him, right? So it was pretty quick for him to go. And I also knew I was going to get better, more interesting characters that I wanted. Yeah. Because I knew, of course, that Jaheira and Khaled were coming up pretty quick, and I thought there was one in Baragast. I didn't remember it was this Nira, but once I saw her, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember her too because of the wild magic, which was also a thing at the time. So there was a book. I can't remember what it was, but there was a Spellfire, I think it was what it was called, which introduced the concept into the fiction of like somebody who just channeled magic, just naturally, and it became
becomes a sorcerer, really, right? In 5th edition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the thing to note about these characters we're talking about, which again comes back to the dialogue system and the alignment system, that's maybe not fair to call it a system in this game because I don't think they heavily hit it, but they the options of companion characters that they gave you that are kind of peppered around the world can also be a choice that you have to relate to how you are going to role play the game. So if you want to play an evil character, they have a set of evil companions if you want,
right.
And so you can just be the marauding jerks, and then if you're playing a good character, they have the ones to support that too.
Yeah, the way it does systemically come into play is that those characters will not want to stay with one another. Right. If you have, I think Jaheira and Khaled are generally good, they will not want to stick around with, Mondragon and Exar if you try to keep them for a long time. I think those 2 characters might want to leave on their own in Neshkel. I can't recall.
That is, that
vague memory that you got them there, and then they were like, all right, see you later, to open up spaces for other characters, I think. But I can remember, and this will come up later, I can remember characters that are beloved that I had out of my party for very particular reasons back in the day, and we'll see if that works out this time as well. So
particular reasons of your own, or you mean in the game?
Particular reasons of my own. Well, in the game, things that would happen in the game with those characters that made me finally go, you know what?
You're done. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, well, that'll be fun.
that'll be fun to talk about. But yeah, I think that's the extent, is that characters, I don't think they'll necessarily dislike you because of course you're the chosen one and everybody loves you, but
they can't stand each other.
I do think they will not be able to handle each other. And so I tend to like to play heroic characters, so that's no big deal for me. I'll just not hire the evil ones. But
the last thing maybe I'll mention on this topic, or maybe for this episode for me, is that relates to all of this character stuff we're talking about is the inclusion of VO and voicing not every single line, which they do eventually get to down the road for BioWare, but having enough VO in the game for a D&D game like this to really have a good sense of character, which, we talked probably some about that with the Diablo series, because obviously some very memorable characters in that, at least NPCs. And a lot of it is repeated lines, right, that are just flavor text or flavor lines that you will hear many times throughout the game. But in this game, like in the middle of adventuring as well as combat, there's these sort of signature lines, like Imoen specifically, there's just these lines and Jaheira that that's kind of what I was talking about when it comes to flashbacks. You just hear these lines, these voice
and
lines.
And you've heard them out, 100
into
times.
your head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, that's
seeking a soul in search of answers. Yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Or you must gather your party before venturing forth.
Yes. Oh my God.
Holy cow. I haven't heard that in a while, but it's so iconic. Which is funny because that's not a tabletop thing, right? That's purely a computer game thing. Yeah.
Right. Because of course we don't you guys split. If you guys have split up, in my campaign, and I'm always like, okay, sometimes it's been fun. So
that would be funny if you did say that, though. You could.
Yeah, you must gather your party. Yeah.
You can't leave this.
Sorry, you must gather your party before venturing forth. Well, let's gather ourselves and some email and reviews and venture forth into the feedback portion. I did not look ahead to see where we should play to. I recall, 7 chapters.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, maybe should we just attempt to do 2 more chapters?
Yeah, I think so.
And see how that goes. Yeah, that's true, because we can't really do a chapter per episode. It's too much. So too long of a series.
Yeah. I don't think we want to go that slow, because I do think at a certain point we'll be touching some sort of. There'll be some interesting things to talk about with regards to leveling, like how the power curve feels and weird things like that. But there is a point at which it's like, okay, now we're just talking D&D, or we're going to the story in a lot of detail, which I don't think is necessarily the most important part of the game. But I do think how the system, especially as we get higher power, because the early game can be quite rough, but I do think that'll be interesting. And, there may be some places where we diverge on choices as well. So there may be points where that's worth looking at. So.
In retrospect, though, I don't think I could have stomached it. I probably, maybe I should have played just a whole evil. Maybe I should have just gone evil to see what happened.
I can't do it. It's just not me.
I know. I don't think I could have lasted for sure, but I'm really intrigued to know what this game is like in that regard. But
after playing the Nosferatu, aren't you a little burned out on playing?
Yeah, that's fair. But it makes for a good podcast, though. Maybe But no, I'm not going to start over. So we'll see how it goes. And plus, I had to play Frosty. I had to. So
yeah. Oh, I know. I had to play Samia. So
yeah, it's good.
It's the whole thing. Okay. All right. Well, let's turn to. So we've established that's where we're playing to next time. Chapters 2 through 2 and 3. We should be able to get all that done. It is. I worry though, which chapter will be the chunkiest? I don't know. We'll find out.
We might have to call an audible along the way sometimes.
Yeah.
So
We'll see how it goes. But that'll be our aim. I have a review this week. It's brief and to the point. It's intelligent and accessible. This was in the podcast app on iTunes or on your Apple devices. We do, of course, love all the reviews we get in whatever form. And if we don't read them, just go ahead and send them to us at devgameclub@gmail.com, which I'll repeat in a moment when we do email. But This one is intelligent and accessible from etc. etc. And the brief one line or two sentence fragment. Two smart dudes talking video game development. Good stuff. Succinct,
nice.
to the
Short,
point.
Sweet, I like it.
Short, sweet, etc., etc. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're happy to have those. Of course, we don't do any advertising of any sort, so reviews are a great way for us to reach new listeners. Or, if you've given us a review, tell a friend. Why don't you go ahead and turn to the email, sir? I sent you one to read.
Okay, email. How does what you were working on affect your mood? Okay, interesting. It's from Sam. Hey guys, during the interview with Lanny, you were discussing how Nintendo makes genuinely joyful games. I noticed this too when I was having some difficulties with depression. I decided to make a hard switch to Nintendo games and put down my Dark Souls for a while. I wouldn't say this solved my problem, but taking in this bright, colorful, and joyful experiences, bright, colorful, and joyful experiences was a source of comfort. I also noticed that I die more in Mario than Dark Souls. That's interesting. My question for you both is this. Does the type of game you're making affect your moods? Does spending all day animating Lara Croft's violent demise put you in a different mood than animating Mario bouncing on cute turtles? Or do you become numb to both because you were doing it all day, every day for years? Sam.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, I work in the sort of less visual aspect of games, right? I'm a coder, and it's less visual in the sense that I'm mostly working in text, I guess, writing code when I'm writing code. I'm also have typically been a lead for most of my career, so there's a lot of people time. I would actually say part of what has affected my mood is, when I'm on smaller projects and there's less people time, I notice it. But that's sort of separate from what I'm ostensibly working on all day. I mean, I think it probably does to some extent, but probably less for me. I know, having worked on Bethesda games, and when those started to become more and more, doing Fallout in particular. So that was a lineage of a series that had the ability to kill children. I believe in the first two games, the 2D games, and that was something that was kind of a hard no at Bethesda. And I remember the VP of marketing, Pete Hines, going out and defending that on Twitter to people who are complaining that you don't let us kill the kids, and we're like, really, that's what you want? It's just like, that's the important thing to you. And honestly, like, it probably wouldn't affect my day to day at all. I wouldn't be crazy about working on a game that allows that, I think, but for people who have to like animate those grisly things, who might be parents themselves, would not want to ask that of people who work in those areas. So we had a system in Fallout called meat caps, and I just don't want to be the person who has to make meat caps for child models. That's anyway.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right in that it I can't speak for those folks either, but it is going to impact people who are directly animating or building those sorts of models. But yeah, we maybe someday we'll have someone on, we can ask them that question. For me, it's a little bit weirder. I would say yes, sometimes it does. I have also worked on a lot of sci-fi stuff as well, where you can remove yourself from some of that stuff. But I've worked on a lot of shooters where we're scrutinizing guns a lot, and there are moments when I take a step back and think about what we're doing and what we're debating and arguing about, and I kind of have to have perspective. But the thing that so the simple answer is sometimes it does, but the real answer for me, which I've, as you ask, Sam, it's making me think about it a little bit harder, because I do think about this from time to time, just because I think it's good to reflect on how you impact the world in general in what you do day to day. But the funny thing about what I do specifically because of my role, I'm kind of like always analyzing stuff in the terms of the experience and the product, I guess, to sound sort of cheesy about it. And so I don't know if that kind of abstracts it more for me. And I kind of like, put it into a box of, unreality, because ultimately, when you're reviewing an animation or giving feedback on a model or something, you're doing that multiple times, right? It's not like you just see that one time and then you have the shock and then it goes away. It's like, no, you're actually looking at this multiple times. And so it's not necessarily a numbness, but it is sort of like, it's a craft, unfortunately, a weird way to say it, but, and so you're kind of like, you kind of remove yourself from the reality of what it is, because you actually have to deliver a thing, you have to deliver an experience of some kind. And so it's like, well, at least for me, I don't know if that's just me compartmentalizing that or what or if I'm just a robot or what it is. But I think anyone who says that stuff doesn't impact them some is probably kidding themselves. So it does, but it's just a weird, when you're doing it as a product or an experience, it's definitely a weird lens.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say for me that is a thing that I know affects my mood pretty greatly is project rhythms, less so than what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So I know after I ship a game, I'm going to be in a funk because you go from a period of like having a list of things to do every day, and exactly what to do, and like you're used to working in the engine and doing whatever, to then you ship, then you submit it or whatever, and you can't work on the game maybe. I mean, this has changed a little bit as consoles have gone online and stuff like this, but I can remember on Starfighter games or whatever, and even Republic Commando, like you get to that point, you ship, and now it's like now you're in the postnatal depression, right? To borrow from somewhere else. You've delivered it, and now you're like, well, now what do I do with myself? Like because you were so go, and you always knew exactly what you're doing. You kind of get into that psychological flow state, even though it's often crunchy and bad for you. You still have this like, exactly what to do. You know how to meet the challenges of what you're trying to do. Like you get into literal flow, and then that just cuts off, like it drops off a cliff. And that can be really, really tough. I've had that happen mid-project as well, when you get kind of into a doldrum. Like I had a project I was working on where I had built a lot of gameplay code, and then I had to go and build the tools. And it was partly why I asked Soren that question about how he stuck the Orion on the AI, was not that this was related directly, but it was like I had at one point had to like get started with tools, and it was just like, where do I start? And just like floundering a little bit for a while. Yeah, it was such a big shift, and it was like I had nothing. I was starting from almost nothing, and it was like, I mean, I had gameplay, but I was writing all the code myself, so I was starting from nothing with the tools, and like how am I going to do this? And just getting to the point of like knowing what to do took a while, and there'd be parts where I'd be like, oh man, I know this part's going to be terrible, and I just would procrastinate on it and just feel bad. Like, so you just have these, like, there are rhythms, but they are project rhythms for me more than that, because of what I do. They're more timing based than they are so that's kind of my distinction, I would say.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's get to we had one other one. This was actually a follow-up. We had heard from Michael a couple weeks ago about being able to avoid the gameplay, basically. He says, continuing the conversation, this was Zelda and running away. It was running away from combat, as I recall it. He says, I think you may have misunderstood. The problem for me isn't watching other people play. It's playing games myself with the knowledge that by the game's own rules, the quote-unquote fun way to play is a waste of time. It forces me to choose between playing the game quote-unquote right or playing it efficiently. Regardless of which choice I make in each case, it varies. It's unpleasant to have to choose in the first place. There's plenty of games that make sure the intended way and the path of least resistance are the same thing, so I know it doesn't have to be that way. For example, you discussed the way Nintendo took steps to make sure it wasn't possible, at least by conventional means, to skip their block-pushing puzzles in Ocarina of Time. Was that a quote-unquote Band-Aid solution? If they didn't take those steps and found that many players bypassed those puzzles, would you be making the argument that it reveals a fundamental problem with the puzzle design as you did with the combat encounters in Halo? I would argue that a game undermining its best features like that is the fundamental flaw. Thanks for the interesting discussion, Michael. You have any thoughts about that? I have sort of thoughts about the block puzzles specifically, but of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like my answer is going to be similar, to be honest, even though he was talking about like his perspective playing versus watching was a little bit misunderstood or miscommunicated. I think my answers are still kind of the same, because I think taking something like combat, it still comes down to an underlying desire to play good combat, you know what I mean? Even if you can skip some of it. And so, RPGs, as we're talking about with Baldur's Gate, sometimes you're getting into combat because you want the XP, right? So there's a reward there. So that's how they kind of incentivize you to do it. And that's not the case with Zelda, because you don't really have XP. I don't think that, I think it really depends for me on whether I think there's an underlying flaw with something like that. With the block puzzle, I don't think, that's just a whole different goal. But maybe you should jump into that, because you.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say there is that it's not a fundamental. There is. I would not say like there is a fundamental play to Zelda in some ways, right? Zelda's so varied in its experience that none of it is especially the adventuring is the key, right? More than anything else, right? I guess that's the fun of play. It's not like you do 30 block puzzles. It's not like playing The Witness or something like that. The whole game is those puzzles, right? The line drawing puzzles that are in The Witness, or whatever, some other puzzle game. There's and a more efficient way to play The Witness, I guess, would be to look on the internet for the solution to all the puzzles as you do them. That's more efficient.
Right. That's a good, that's a good analogy. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Efficiency is not really the point goal for me. I've talked about, I'm going to mention Assassin's Creed again this week, because I've been playing Origins. There's a point at which I've hit maximum level. I've finished the main story, but there's a million little question marks and whatever on the map, and I'm just going around and doing them. And like, it's repetitive. It's still kind of fun. It's a waste of time, as you put it. Like, it's not efficient. Like, I could move on to another game, but I'm enjoying this. Like, it's fine. Like, I guess it's, you may just have different goals for your game time, than I do as well. So that's what I was going to say. Player thing.
Yeah. It may just be that Michael, is that right? Did I forget?
Michael,
yeah. It might just be that Michael, is more of a fan of certain genres than others, that have different goals. I think I said this again to reiterate what I think I probably said when he asked the question originally. I definitely am. I've become right or wrong. I've become way more a fan of intrinsic rewards for gameplay and experiences in games than extrinsic, which I always have trouble saying that word. But and what I mean by that is, again, that inherent joy or excitement or thrill of playing, the core game of it, and that should be the reward. And so if he's talking about efficiency to getting to the reward or getting through to a conclusion of something, ideally you want to have that be the light, the guiding light. And I would use Halo's combat as an example, right? There's just something, there are ways to skip lots of stuff in Halo, but it's pretty fun combat for, shooter combat. Yeah. So it's like play through, and occasionally you'll pick up weapons and stuff. So there's some reward like that, right, that you're doing for taking down an enemy, and that might be a motivation. But yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely gray area in all of this, but it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it does really. Yeah, that's another kind of famous Chris Hecker talk, he asked back at the beginning of achievements, right, when they first were a thing, like, do we really want to do this? Is this really a good thing for activities? Because, if you look at the psychological literature, if you're reading a book, you're reading the most books in class to get, the pizza party, then you're reading for the pizza party and you're not getting anything out of the reading, right? Because you're just trying to get the pizza party, I think was the example he used, something along those lines, right? If you get money for every book that you read, in the month of March, as we used to do back when I was in short trousers, I guess they used to say, back when I was a newsie in the 20s, they used to wear that. Anyway.
No, I'm with you. It's just, it's hilarious.
I became Christian Bale there for a second. We used to do that, and it was weird. It was like, now you're not reading because you like to read, you're reading because you're trying to get the high score, right? Or whatever. And it's just like, that's weird. Like, I just like reading, right? I read a lot and I keep track of what I read every year, but it's not actually because I care how many books I read. It's because in a couple of years, I'll go and I'll see something on the shelf and be like, that sounds familiar. Have I read that? Or have I read that author? And I'll want to be able to look. So that's really the only reason I do it. I want to have a record because I'll forget. And I want to know, oh yeah, I have read that author. This is the next book, that person has written or whatever. So anyway. All right. Well, that's our email. So that's our show. We thank folks for sending those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. And of course, all the reviews. We love those. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end,
which I believe is also your Twitch.
It is also my Twitch and other spots. But yeah, that's also happening still. I'm still playing Hitman. Thank you for mentioning
hitting men. Yeah, I've returned to Twitch to do this game anyway, Baldur's Gate. So you can find that at twitch.tv.
I recommend it because he definitely he does some reading. So he's doing some spoken word
voice work.
Some spoken word reader's theater, if you will, in all sorts of dialect or accents. So you never know what you're going to get. So that's
unlikely to be consistent from session to session, because I will almost certainly not remember character voices, and that is probably also true of my D&D sessions, because I don't remember what guys talk like the last time. But whatever, who cares?
Me either.
Anyway, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Our new logo is, of course, by Marcus Chia. Thank you to all of them. Have fun gathering your party this week and venturing forth. And good night.
Good night.